Mandisa Mashego. Such a cute little laugh and smile. You're looking very pretty, really liking your specs. The last time we had a chat, we were speaking about the work that you guys are doing with electoral reform. And I think before you get to that, I'd like to know, because from something that you raised, Amabunu, white people during apartheid South Africa, they had a different type of constitution or democracy, not constitution, a democracy than us. Would you know the differences between the two?
There was a name for how Parliament was set up. It just doesn't come to mind now, but you would remember, or you would know from reading or just basic Google searches, that Black people were living in two different environments. One under the so-called South African environment, which means within the geographic demarcation of South Africa. So for instance, if you were inland, you were in Transvaal. And Transvaal was what is today known as Limpopo, Northwest, Gauteng, Mpumalanga, right? So those four put together were Transvaal, and then you had Northeast, Southwest, Transvaal, etc. And then you had Black people who were living, and within the context of South Africa, white people lived in South Africa, in the demarcation called South Africa, South Africa, right? And then you had the Bantustans. And in the Bantustans, just an addition. Indian people, colored people also lived in South Africa, basically in terms of the spatial planning, where once you've been given your identification through your birth certificate, you are already racially placed, geographically placed according to your racial classification. And within the South African racial classification, there were obviously different areas. Demarcated for whites specifically in terms of geographic demarcation, demarcated for blacks, Africans in particular, demarcated for colored people, and demarcated for Indian people. And then Black people all had a second option, or I don't know if to call it an option, but Black people then could live also in the Bantustans. And in that context, South Africa was then governed on a two sort of pronged basis. So in the Bantustans, I think there were 9 of them. I can't remember, actually. I'm just saying 9 because of the provinces. But they were called, in short, the TBVC states. I don't know why TBVC, because there were more. Transkei, Bophuthatswana, Venda, Ciskei, Gangwane, KwaZulu, Qwaqwa. I don't remember the others, right? And according to those Bantustans, Black people were basically spatially placed according to their tribal or ethnic or language, grouping, and then of course in the South Africa now. Back to the example of Transvaal, there were 4 provinces under the old South Africa. It was Transvaal, it was the Cape, it was Free State, and it was Natal, right? And within the confines of each province, you had a spatial planning of racial demarcation. Again, I was trying to hone in on the governance framework of the apartheid government as I understand it, because I'm not giving you prescribed references to acts and bills and laws and bylaws. I'm just telling you what I understand and how I studied it from school, and obviously continue to understand it when you compare the pre-94 and the post-94 environment. Is that in the Transvaal, for instance, right? Let's take the Transvaal because the Transvaal was the biggest province. As you can understand, its composition is exactly as I explained it earlier. It was made up of 4 inland provinces, and the population groupings were much vaster and a lot more demographically varied, yeah? And so in a classical town, let's take Johannesburg as an example. You can take Witbank in Mpumalanga, you can take Pietersburg in Limpopo, you can take any town that was built by the apartheid and the pre-apartheid colonial governments. Every town is designed exactly the same way. The size is irrelevant. If you're white and you are Greek, white, you are Portuguese, in Joburg, you had a lot more Jewish people than in other provinces. Of course, in fact, I think it's only Joburg where there's a lot of Jewish people in Cape Town. And you're Jewish and you are Italian. I'm thinking of all the different racial groupings within the white population. You would live in a certain part of the town. So Black people don't understand that the apartheid thing was really as divisive and segregationist as possible. It wasn't just amongst Black people. And then if you were Black, you would live in a township like Soweto. And in Soweto, you would be divided according to whether you're Northern Sotho, Southern Sotho, Xhosa, Pedi, Venda, whatever you may have been. And then it's all, and even in the colored communities, because my mother lives in a colored area and we have a property in a colored township. In the colored townships, you would be classified according to whether you're a colored person who looks black, a colored person who looks Indian, a colored person who looks colored, whatever that means, or colored person who is so-called Cape colored, like my mother was classified Cape colored because she's born of white and black and looks more white than black.
Much lighter.
Right? No, it's not about being light. It's literally, can you pass for being white? So if you looked at my mother and in your mind you thought she was white, then she would then be classified Cape colored, and they would live in slightly better houses within El Dorado Park. You would have further racial classification. Then you have the tribal classification amongst blacks. And then amongst Indians, it also existed. It doesn't matter how much Indians want to deny it. The dark-skinned Indians that you are familiar with if you're from KZN, I'm saying that because in inland, most people are not very familiar with very, very dark-skinned Indian people.
That is true.
And then the light-skinned Indian people with green eyes and lighter hair, etc., would get definite. Everything was racially classified, literally according to how you looked. It didn't matter whether you were actually African or not. If you did not look African and you looked this, you would be classified that way. And then you would be geographically placed and even given a stand. My mother was given a stand in a township at the time. It was called Nel, India. It's actually Valencia in Nelspruit because we settled there. My father was from there because of obviously her looks and her racial classification, despite the fact that she's Xhosa. It's the complexities of apartheid. Now, let's come to the governance issues. And I always say this, it doesn't matter what you do in life, whether it's in your business, in your private life, in government, running a country, running a big company, a small company. It's about the administration and how well structured you are to implement the plan that you have. Your plan could be a plan to kill people. It could be a plan to grow people. It could be a plan to develop an economy in a certain sector. It doesn't matter whether the plan is a good plan, bad plan, it has good intentions. What is good about a good plan and an effective plan is the administration. And you have to give it to the Europeans, the Caucasians. They've proven themselves time and time and again. They are damn good at administration. And the administration of the apartheid government was so good that it literally structured everything scientifically. They would know exactly population numbers, how much they need to create of this and that. Everything was scientifically done, complete opposite of what we have today. And their governance framework was democratic to them. Although, yes, we can still argue about that, only to the extent that if you look at the simplistic definition of democracy, which is people participating in their own governing, ruling themselves, obviously in a mass population context like we have, tens of millions of people, that democracy is then acted out through elections. Elections is not the only means to democracy. Democracy just means that people must participate in their governing. The apartheid government, what they did, they basically gave a democratic order of some sorts. Like I said, I can't remember the term that's used for that sort of government. And they only gave it to white people, colored people, and Indian people. Again, their administration was on point in terms of what they wanted to achieve, their own objectives. Doesn't matter if it was to the detriment of Africans. It was stratified. So colored people could vote, of course. Indian people could vote, white people could vote, but within the context of different houses of government. In South Africa, ignore now the part about the Bantustans. We'll come to the Bantustans. Within the South African Parliamentarian Council legislative framework, colored people were given what is called House of Representatives. Indian people were given a house called House of Delegates. And then white people as government or parliament, well, I think that was, I can't remember what name it was called, but that was the primary National Assembly, right? The main superior, sort of like you know, in the context of a constitutional court. Because remember, there was no constitution under apartheid. There were only laws. And the highest organ of state was national parliament, was National Assembly.
A lot of people would not know that coloreds and Indians could vote back in the day. We assume that colored, Indian, and black Africans all couldn't vote.
No, people knew that coloreds and Indians could vote. If you're young, maybe you don't read as much. I don't know why young people don't read, because the internet is free. I say this all the time. We grew up when you had to walk to a library, and the library could sometimes be very far from your home. And we read. and we continue to read. So I'm not sure why people don't understand that. But yes, Indian people and colored people could vote under the government of, I must not say this and then it sounds as though they had complete freedom. No,
Yes.
it was within the apartheid context. For the same reason that in the Bantustans, right, each Bantustan was administered by the apartheid government. They got their budgets from the apartheid government because obviously I'm not sure if I didn't grow up in a Bantustan. So I was born there, I think. But no, actually I wasn't. I was born in King Williamstown, and King Williamstown was classified not under Ciskei, even though it was the town that we used from Zwelitsha. It was classified under the Cape Colony, under South Africa. But the point is, Indian people and colored people could vote within the context of self-governance, because that's what the apartheid government was about. It was like, let's all racially organize ourselves in little groupings according to our race groups, right? And go very micro, like I explained. They would have areas for Greek people, areas for Portuguese people, areas for Italian people, etc. In Joburg, you know very well those areas that are demarcated according to that racial classification, and then areas for colored people, etc., etc. And so within your race group, govern yourself. That's basically what they were saying, and that's what they called, in terms of their economic plan and strategy, separate development. But they had a law, obviously, after 1948 that they put in place called separate development, to say stay together and develop within the nucleus of your environment. And so that's the voting that colored people were allowed to do within their wards and their areas.
You're saying the apartheid government was very big on self-governance.
Yes.
Even black people, it was like, here's a Bantustan, govern
That's what
yourselves.
the Bantustans were about. That's why the racial classification, that's why the geographic racial classification, to say you live there with people who speak your language, who look like you, who believe in cultural beliefs that you hold, who uphold value systems, ethics and morals, or whatever it is that you uphold. Be your own little oranje, right? So that's basically what South Africa was. It was just a whole lot of oranjes. And what they were saying, it was a dick standing exercise, right? It was just a dick sizing exercise, let me put it that way. Because what it was Afrikaner men or white men saying, and I'm saying men because women were not governing and didn't have, the right even to be voted for, etc. But what white men were saying was, okay, that's fine. We're fighting about who's going to, stay where, who's going to own the land. That's okay. We're in charge now from 1948. So we're going to give everybody their own place and then develop in your place. That's basically what they were saying, right? Of course, we all know that it was wrong and rather arrogant of them to do that, but that's basically what happened from 1948 until 1994, or let's say until 1991, when or even the late 80s, when there were various referenda held in South Africa for white people and colored people and Indian people to vote and decide whether they want one Group Areas Act to be scrapped, which means that apartheid spatial planning according to racial and tribal lines to end. Two, for education, Bantu education to be scrapped, not rather to be scrapped, but rather for the education system that was the exclusive preserve of white people, colored people, and Indian people to be opened up also to Africans, based on wherever they were coming from. And since those referenda, really, I would say technically apartheid lasted only, I think the first referendum was held in 1987. And then, of course, the other referendum that was held was for whites, Indians and coloreds to decide whether they still wanted the Morality Act or Immorality Act to be upheld, which means whether they were still comfortable with the law being kept in place to say that you cannot marry across racial lines. And I can't remember the other act. Yeah, there was also the Group Areas Act. They also held a referendum for the people who could vote at the time, whites, coloreds, and Indians, to decide whether people in South Africa should still live according to their racial grouping.
Do you think the biggest, listening to what you're saying now, do you think the biggest issue that Black Africans had was maybe not so much interracial relationships and mingling and trading, but the fact that the apartheid government ensured that the places these people were being sent to didn't have productive land, didn't have the mines, for example, and commodities, and they couldn't engage in economic activity because of the demarcations? Or do you think Black Africans actually wanted just to be able to engage and interact? What would be the issue be? I'm asking this because when you listen to some of the supporters of some of the political parties today, some of them almost echo the words of people like Obantu Bigo. We want to govern ourselves.
Yeah.
We want to be able to do our own. We want a black bank. We want a black, and you're almost saying the apartheid government was saying, go develop on your own. But could it have been that they said develop on your own, but they were sending you to a place where you couldn't, realistically?
Look, I mean, there's a lot of economic reasons, in actual fact, why besides logical reasons that you can't walk into somebody's land and then decide to cut up that land and tell this person, you stay there, you stay there. I mean, that's a non-starter. We can't even debate that. We're not debating whether apartheid was correct or not. Apartheid was disgusting, atrocious, and it belongs in the past. But there are components of how apartheid was administered, which is what I constantly talk about. The reasons why people go into MBAs and why people do PhDs is to learn and master the game of administration in a modern, globalized economy, is that it's not even about that. That question doesn't arise because it's a fact that the Bantustans were demarcated in such a way that the South African National Party-led government under the Boers gave themselves the most fertile pieces of land. All the major river systems were governed by, the National Party government, all the water systems. They basically, also the Reserve Bank. I mean, I'm not sure if the Bantustans were allowed to have their own sort of fiscal structure, like collect their own taxes. I know there was a point when some of the Bantustans had their own currency, by the way. Unless I'm confusing it with Swaziland.
I may have heard that when you speak of
there was a
like
time. There was a time when some of the Bantustan government had their own currencies, and so obviously I'm sure they had some kind of. But ultimately, all of them were administered financially and legally, economically by the apartheid government. But based on what you're asking me now, yes, of course, it's very stupid for people to talk about black banks and all of that. And I'll tell you why. Because if we wanted to have a black bank, nobody's stopping you. There's no law that says you can't have a black bank. What is the definition of a black bank? The shareholders must be majority black, or the customers must be majority black? What is the definition of what is a black bank? Because for me, a bank is a bank. All it needs to do is not be discriminatory, and is to be affirming to the people who need assistance in terms of upliftment in this fight towards bringing South Africa towards a greater sense of equality. But here's the thing. The very same people and proponents of who even misconstrue some of the things that Stephen Bantu Biko or the likes of Frans Fanon and all of that were saying is that you decry separate development. You decry it. You decry apartheid and scream and shout how evil it was. In fact, you even support the fact that apartheid was the struggle against apartheid, the political struggle against apartheid that was led by the today's crooks, was basically all about racial integration, which was the first programmatic problem with the fight against apartheid. In fact, even to talk about fighting apartheid was wrong, because what the fight should have been around coloniality and colonialism. Because apartheid is part of colonialism. It's just like the last stretch of the colonial era, of the physical material colonial era that we had to go through. Why I'm saying that is because if you're fighting over racial integration, if you're fighting for your right to Chole Nomlungu, then you get that. That's what you got in 1994.
Yes.
You basically got the right to go to work where, move after 6 o'clock wherever you wanted, to live where you can afford, go to school where you can afford. That's basically what you voted for. You didn't vote for, black people didn't actually even understand. And this is evidence of it. Today we are evidence. We didn't understand that governance has nothing to do with race. It has everything to do with economics. Race has nothing to do with it. Race has nothing to do with who you vote for, how you vote, etc. It's irrelevant. What is relevant is what happens to your economy. What happens to you as a person economically, your children, your family, your neighbors, your community? What happens with you after voting economically? The rest is nonsense. It's social stuff. Who cares about social stuff? Where I can go and drink alcohol if I drink alcohol and get drunk. We participated in it as citizens of South Africa. We participated in the fake struggle for liberation. There's no liberation unless you are able to take care of yourself. For as long as you're going to depend on somebody else to feed you, you're 18 years old, you're still living at home, and you have a nerve to tell your parents nonsense whenever they tell you, hey, you're an adult. You shouldn't be living at home at 18, right? So if you're fighting for a society that keeps you dependent well into your teens, you're a human being. You've got a brain that's more superior than any animal. That's why you're a human being. You should be able to exercise that brain, to be independent, to coexist with everybody else on this earth in a responsible way, but make your contribution, be a productive citizen. You're not on this earth to come and be a dependent. At the age of 30, 40, 50, you are fighting over your mother's house. And then you're talking about freedom, this and that. We have the wrong context of freedom. And the fact that we are not incapable, but we are finding it extremely difficult to develop ourselves economically as Black people, to organize ourselves administratively, the way white people did. When they wanted to implement apartheid, they made sure that they were organized. Ward councillors during apartheid, under the apartheid government, were not paid salaries.
Really?
Yes, because being a ward councillor, you are you don't even need a bus. There's few wards in South Africa where you need a bus. There's Ward 99 in Tshwane, if they haven't redemarcated it, where you literally need transport to travel from one part of the ward to another. There's another ward in Sidibeng, in Devon, where you need transport to travel in the ward because it's so vast. Many rural areas have got those kinds of wards where it's one ward. But in an urbanized South African context, like here, La Esprit Ward Bani Las Kona Manch, you don't need a ward councillor on a salary to do what? For him to walk and go and check the substation, see if it's working. For him to go and check up on ama households to see if there's any social issues that need to be attended to. For him to go and check a pothole Kumalo Street. Udingani moto la Spruit View. Okanye a city of Joburg, inside the CBD of Joburg, or in my area, North Riding, or in Soweto, or anywhere, Vosloorus, Katlehong, Tembisa. Why would you need a car? Why would you need a salary to do what? The bylaws and the laws were changed because the current criminal government are basically clowns and thieves who have no idea of what an economy is. They've no clue. All they wanted was to make sure that they can get into politics, fight over seats. That's why they have proportional representation as a system. To say, you vote for the political party and its executives through its own so-called democratic processes, which we've discussed before, are not democratic at all, when I gave you the example of if you look at a ward. So everything that you need to look at in government to work out whether it's working or not, just look at the area where you stay. Don't worry yourself about what's going on in town, what's happening in waterfall estates, what's happening, Don't worry yourself about that. Look at your area, your ward, and ask yourself, is everything okay? And if it's not okay, what needs to be done to make it okay? If we had made sure that public representatives do not get a salary, one, that they get to keep their jobs and they do this as a part-time thing, like happens in China. In China, and I stand corrected, if I'm wrong, I'll do my research, but I'm pretty sure in China, members of parliament don't get salaries. They have to have their own careers and jobs and businesses, right? And then they do this lawmaking, monitoring laws, amending laws, oversight over, government expenditure. You need oversight. You do oversight in your own house, in your own family. Check a bank, my debit orders. That's oversight. Yeah. If you're going to take your salary uhambe uye tavern uyodakwa qala okanye uyothengela your side chick a blonde weave okanye uyomenzela i-chemical peel okanye umthengela iqathula, you're not doing oversight, you're reckless. And if your wife or your kids or anybody else that you share your life with are not going to do oversight over you to see that you're not wasting imali laikaya, what's going to happen? You're going to end up with pretty much a situation that South Africa has ended up in. Why? Because we, the kids who are supposed to be part of government, we don't know how much money government collects every month. If I can ask anybody in this room now, from even including the technical team, how much money does South Africa collect in taxes? Okay, at least a year. Give me an average. They don't know. Why? If you don't know that basic information, right? Like my daughter used to always know how much I earn because then it was me and her. I had to make her understand that, listen, you're my responsibility because I gave birth to you. So how much money I earn is important to you so that you understand when I say no, I can't afford this, you get it. I-bond imalini, imoto imalini, insurance imalini, ukudla, ugezi, all the stuff that we have to pay for, levies in the body corporate. In fact, she often should be like, how are you managing? I mean, how did you manage all this time? You know, when she now understands that actually mali ayiko. So we are those reckless community and family members. You know, those reckless family members who just don't know what's happening in the house and they don't care. Their job is just to complain. We don't know how much money government is collecting from us. Often we don't pay ourselves for things.
Yes.
All we know is that they are looting the money. But le mali le iluthwayo siyazi nokuthi kuphi ayikho nokuba khona ngoba kuphilwa ngezikweleti phela manje ku-government.
Do you think part of the problem, we know there's a political illiteracy issue, and it's almost like there's no incentive for people to educate themselves politically. Do you think a big chunk of it is because our government has intentionally done it so? And number two, because people don't pay tax. So if they're not paying, let's say, personal income tax and corporate income tax, it doesn't matter to them how much money government is collecting, as long as they make sure that they're receiving what they're meant to be getting, the grants, etc. Do you believe that's part of the problem?
Look,
and
I mean,
think to follow on that, what are your thoughts, because you speak about ward councillors now, your thoughts on other political leaders and the salaries that they get, members of parliament, ministers, etc.?
Yeah, no, it's done. Me, I just think salaries must fall off.
Before you speak of salaries,
When I went to the
tax,
legislature, I was a senior manager at a cell phone network company. And honest to God, I wouldn't have, I mean, I loved the prospect of making a difference and doing real work in communities, right? I suppose I've got this natural teaching spirit and I really like to be productive and helpful. And I hated having to leave my job in order to accept a seat that I was deployed to by the political party that I was affiliated to at the time. Because quite frankly, I didn't need to do that. I could have stayed in my job if the law allowed and then done that part-time because you really don't need to be there full-time. But you can't separate the economy and politics. You can't. Doesn't matter how, they coexist symbiotically, more abusively, but symbiotically. The one depends on the other. In the capitalist framework that we exist in, where the economy is governed by profits, companies need to be regulated. The industries within which they exist need to be regulated, and there needs to be laws put in place for those. And those laws must benefit the capitalists, the investors, and the people who are productively engaged in that economy and want to make a profit out of that economy. And so you cannot separate the two. For us as the backward people, because we must be honest, we are backward in terms of all the standards and of measure that you can apply in terms of economic wellness of a country. Even if you use the happiness index, which I know advanced European countries use, they use the happiness index to check how happy their citizens are. We are definitely one of the most depressed, miserable countries in the world. It's clear with all the violence and crime and all the problems that we have. We're definitely not happy people, but according to economic standards, we as Black people as a population are backward, and we are holding ourselves backward by being politically illiterate. Like I said, the internet is there, information. There's no piece of legislation that you can't Google. If you want to know if there's a law that governs tree planting, you can just Google that. Are there laws in South Africa that govern tree planting? What kind of trees can I plant? What kind of trees can I not plant? Are there toxic trees that I'm not allowed to plant? Right? You can even do it in Zulu. I don't know about this Venda and Estonga, but I know for a fact I can Google Zulu and Swat in Nguni languages. And so for me, we really need to shift the conversation. We need to start shifting it. Like I said earlier when I was describing the Bantustans and the Apartheid spatial planning environment. The main focus for the Apartheid government, for them to attain what they wanted to attain, was to have all the natural resources of the country demarcated under their geographic roof so that they are in control of, all sectors of the economy, because all sectors of the economy come from, nature, right? And so they wanted to control water, gold, platinum, whatever was coming out from underground, and on top of the ground, trees, plants, food, everything, right? Animals, humans, everything. You cannot have an economy unless you have access to natural resources, unfortunately. And so we need to just understand as Black people that our choice, because it is a choice. This thing of always, excusing us as Black people when we don't know things and when we're ignorant, it must just die. I'm hoping that with the current generation, it will die. This nonsense of, glorifying ignorance. No, I'm poor, that's why I don't know. But you have a brain. Who wasn't born poor in this country? Like, who is Black? Who wasn't? Like, we were all born. We walked to school barefoot. Winter, summer, rain, thorns, everything. We were all born in abject poverty, like abject poverty. People like to describe their poverty. Yeah, no, I grew up in a shack. Like, what makes you think everybody else grew up in a mansion? And so the self-pity and the constantly justifying our ignorance must stop. The current political system is governed by laws. The laws, Political Party Funding Act, the Political Party Act, Electoral Act, Electoral Commission Act, whatever set of laws that are governing the political system. Those laws are supposed to be made by us.
The citizens.
Not your representatives in parliament. Like, literally. That is why when you listen to these people talk in parliament, they talk about public participation. But obviously they all pay lip service to it, and they can pay lip service to it. It's not their fault. Stop blaming the abuser. Stop blaming the rapist. Stop blaming the child molester, right? Blame the conditions that the victim, where the victim comes from. The people who live with the victim have allowed for an environment to have rapists and thieves and murderers, etc. If you are not vigilant, we were not put on this earth to chill and bask under the sun and get suntans if you need one. We were put here to walk and think and create and innovate and manufacture and coexist and do stuff. Black people need to start doing that. The reason why white society is so organized, much more than we are, is because perhaps, I suppose, in the development process, let's say if you look at the colonial era of the last so-called 500 years, in Europe, they had the highest number of tribal wars amongst each other. They had clashes from here to Cairo, more than we did in Africa. Right? We were more peacefully existing with each other than in Europe. And so the more conflicts you have amongst people, if those people are going to be developmental in their attitude around the conflict, post-conflict, you're supposed to have a rebuilding. Post-war, there must be rebuilding. We seem to enjoy a conflict situation that lasts forever and ever and just doesn't come to an end. And so for us to understand that we are only going to get development once we get involved and roll up our sleeves. Like I'm saying now, public representatives must not get paid. They don't get paid in China. They only come together in parliament when there's a law they need to process. They go back to their jobs. What we should be paying them for is travel expenses. That's a given. It's very stressful to look after people. Very, very stressful, especially the Black constituency. The townships and the rural areas, peri-urban areas, the underdeveloped areas. It's very, very stressful to look after an area that is depressed, of economic depression. It's a fact. They should get some kind of psychotherapy. I really think politicians who are in parliament and legislatures and councils need that counseling.
They don't go for therapy now?
Well, you can get it through their medical aid. So they should get a medical aid for the term. They should get, travel allowance. They should get their flights paid for if they're doing national work, if they're in parliament. If they're provincially, they should get travel allowance or even cars that can, drive them up and down so that they don't have to have cars. But they should not be getting salaries.
You mentioned medical aid, and it's one of my pain points. Are you not of the school of thought that public representatives or public servants or politicians that are meant to be overlooking public spaces and infrastructure, should they not be legally forced to send their kids to public schools, use public healthcare, because they would have an vested interest in ensuring that those spaces are better?
Yes, they should, but I certainly wasn't going to allow myself to be subjected to that kind of nonsense when I became a public representative, because I had a corporate career, I had medical aid, I could do what I wanted with my income. And so I wasn't obviously up. But I mean, yes, the answer is a simple yes, it should be that way. In an ideal world, it should be that way, because these are the people who are serving on the boards of government. Parliament is a board. You're basically just a board member. But if you're coming from a governing party, if you've managed to get 51% plus, then you get to govern as well, right? You get to be a minister, deputy minister. But yes, that's true. It should be that way, because then they should be able to, they will have better incentive to look after, to make sure that the oversight work and the quality work is done to make sure those facilities are operating optimally. But in practice, yes, I'm saying I'm glad that that wasn't in place when I became a public rep, because I was certainly not going to take responsibility for the crap created by the ANC and go to Bara when I've never been to Bara when I was sick, because I've always had medical aid, because I always worked for myself and made sure that I had medical aid.
I can only imagine how many other politicians share your thoughts, including the ones that created the space we have today, who are also like, but it's like,
do you understand?
Is the way it is, partly because
of them, yeah.
Do you think the future of politics, by politics I'm speaking broadly, the affairs of running this country, lies in people that are not driven by political careers? If you look at the work that Herman Mashaba did with the DA in Johannesburg, as someone that came from a business background, if you look at Gauteng McKenzie and the work that he's been doing, coming from someone that wasn't a political animal, but that was doing business after he came out of jail, etc., etc. Do you think we need more people that have jobs, more people that have businesses, saying, look, I want to come and serve? And maybe the future of this country is getting rid of career politicians who have no other business and no other income besides their salaries in politics.
Look, there's lots of things that need to change. When we won the case as the New Nation movement in the Concourt in 2020, for individuals to be able to contest public office and actually put their names up without being nominated by a political party.
Thank you for that work.
It's a pleasure. It's backbreaking work, but yeah, we continue, because obviously the change that we want today, we might not get today, we might get in 10, 15 years. We might be lucky and get it in a shorter time. But the bottom line is, like I said, public representatives should not be getting a salary. Finished. They can be rewarded, maybe given a pension or something. They do have a pension, but they should not be getting a salary. All public representatives must be subjected to criteria. That's another thing that we're fighting for, is the New Nation movement. Not only was the entire Electoral Act declared unconstitutional, which it is, again, something that wasn't really, it's not our credit to take as the New Nation movement. These are things that, like I said, if we were a citizenry that's responsible, that participates in our own country, in our own governing, in our own economy, we wouldn't be sitting in this situation. There was something called the CODESA negotiations. There was CODESA 1, CODESA 2 in the 80s, and then towards the late 80s, towards the early 90s, there was a CODESA 2, and the late 80s, I think it was CODESA 1. None of us as citizens has asked all those entities that were negotiating around the table with the National Party government and all other, even the one of Helen Suzman and other political parties that were Indian and colored, etc. Africans couldn't have a political party at the time because they were all banned, but obviously this was post the unbanning or leading up to the unbanning with CODESA 1. We should be asking, where are those agreements? Bella, this is our life. We cannot continuously behave like children, like babies, right? We can't continuously behave like these dependent beings. Someone must think for us. Someone must tell us, get up, walk, wake up, work, wash, brush your teeth. We must become fully fledged human beings as the African race on this earth, like other race groups. We should be asking, where are the sunset clauses? Somebody says to me, no, it's in the old constitution, the interim constitution before 1996. Those were the sunset clauses. I'm like, but I've got no guarantee of that. When those people were having those negotiations, those men, because it was a bunch of men, of course, which is why, no wonder we are in the crisis we are in. Even the people you're asking me about now, Gauteng no Mashava, I'm a daughter. I don't like to respond when I'm asked about men. It's not my primary focus to focus on what men should be doing better and not. I just believe men should get off all leadership, like as soon as possible. We are in the crisis we are in today in the world because of men. We are in the economic crisis we are in because of men. We are in the political crisis we're in because of men. We are in the post-COVID depressed economic environment because of men. We are in a war situation in Europe because of men.
But this speaks to what you're saying from a black perspective of black people need to get more active. So I'd argue similarly that I think women need to also rise up.
Definitely.
And get more active.
But women need to get over the hangover of those laws I was talking about. They're gone. They're in the past. I mean, we're already talking 30 years, if not 40 years, if not 50 years, actually, because those laws were actually taken out of the laws, books of the law, even during apartheid in South Africa, in America, in Britain, everywhere. Because in any event, by the way, there's also another understanding that we really need to start getting as South Africans and as Africans in South Africa, is that South Africa is a colonial outpost. We are literally part of the Commonwealth. And Commonwealth literally means Commonwealth. Common to who? To Britain, right? And we are signatories of the Commonwealth. And some of these unspoken things that you don't know and that citizens mostly don't know and don't bother to even try and find out because it's someone else's responsibility to come and educate me. How? Because the brain is on my body. Why is it someone else's responsibility to educate me? All the laws that are passed, if not majority, if not most of them, in the British Parliament and in the American, I don't know what they call it, the Senate, or I don't know what in Washington, come and get passed here in your parliament and you don't say anything about it. COVID is a classical example. There's something called the emergency use authorization nonsense. It's not even a law, it's a policy. Gets a policy and a regulation to who? A policy and a regulation to an entity in America called the federal, what is it called? FDA. FDA, Drug and Administration, something, Federal Drug and Administration, something authority, right? It's almost like we have a similar entity called SAPRA under the Department of Health. If you want to make medication or you want to start a pharmacy or you want to manufacture hospital medical equipment, you need their approval and licensing and regulation, etc. Cyril Ramaphosa, let me say the ANC, because it's even wrong to say Cyril, Zuma, Mbeki, Mandela, Motlanthe. It's wrong to say that. We did not elect, people did not elect Cyril. They elected the ANC. The ANC then deployed Cyril. That's proportional representation, and that's a nonsense. That's the sucking nonsense that needs to stop, right? Because if you elect Penuel directly, Penuel is going to have to come and account directly. But if you elect Penuel Enterprises as a political party and then say, Penuel Enterprises, you take your top 6 or your national leadership people or whatever, and you find a democratic thing inside your party. I mean, what a farce. And then you tell us who's on the list, who's going to be the president. That's different to me electing you, to going to the ballot and voting Penuel Mlotshwa, as opposed to voting Penuel Enterprises political party that then must go and do a list, and in that list, and you've got no control. So we are not engaging in lawmaking. We don't know. We have got policies that are taken from America, like I was making an example with the COVID situation, and applied to SAPRA, a state agency under the Department of Health, to force you to be injected with a substance that you don't know, you have no idea where it comes from. They tell you it's a vaccine, you must take it, you like it, you don't like it, you must take it. They're going to unleash the army and do what totalitarian, authoritarian bull. And we allow that. And as Africans, we need to start not only looking at just what is the problem within our legal framework, what is the problem generally with the global economic framework, and what is it that we need to do differently, starting with government and the private sector, in order for us to change and actually start to rebuild our lives.
I've got 2 more questions. The one being, when you say people should vote for, let's say, a person that they can hold to account, is that the bulk of the electoral reform work that you're doing?
Yeah.
And then I'll ask you one last question.
Yeah, that's basically the core of it. Of course, there's a lot of nitty-gritties involved, but when you want to change society, when you want to bring total sort of, let's say, global in the context of the, let's say, macro, right, or global in the context of South Africa, or universal, you have to start with something that people can relate to in a simplistic way. Then go to the nitty-gritty. So, for instance, the Electoral Act in its entirety is unconstitutional. I've heard people saying, no, it's only that clause. No. An act, if it has one part of it that's unconstitutional, the entire law is unconstitutional. Why? Because for obvious reasons, if you amend, let's say, that section that says there must be a party list submitted to Parliament. On the ballot, there shall be a name of a political party, which obviously means it shall not be a name of an individual. That's the proportional representation I'm talking about. Once you change that one component that talks about how the ballot looks like, that talks about the party list that must be submitted to the IEC, that talks about all these little things. And if that clause is unconstitutional, the entire act is unconstitutional, because when you change that, it has an implication on other components of the same law and even many other related laws. Like, for instance, you've got the Demarcation Act, which, whenever they tell you that your ward number is no longer 2, you are now, this section of the ward is now part of that whole, that's the demarcation board that does that, and municipal demarcation board. Municipal demarcation board's components will be changed, some bylaws will be changed. The Electoral Commission Act, not just the Electoral Act, will need changes. The Electoral Act, the Political Party Funding Act will be changed. There's many laws and acts that will need to be changed and amended. Not just the laws, but also the regulations. But yes, the crux of it, the center of it is that the modalities, of course, as well, because obviously you can imagine it will take a lot more effort and it will be a lot more involving when you start, having independence. You'll also need to probably have a lot more, I think what they call in America primaries. I think Zimbabwe might use a slightly similar system. You might need a system where people are elected at ward or municipal level, or pass some sort of test to say, listen, I've got at least 5,000 people in this municipality supporting me to be a candidate as an individual. There's also other nitty-gritties, like in America, for instance. You think that the American system is better than ours in terms of voting. It's not. They also have proportional representation because they have semi-allowed individuals to be elected directly, semi. But there's a condition that they must belong to a political party still. It says you can register to be a candidate in your area on the forms that they complete with their equivalent of an electoral IEC in the US. They then also have to state, I'm Mandisa Mashego, I'm going to contest the mayoral position in Johannesburg. I belong to this political party. But they've hidden it like that. And so there's many things that need to change. However, those are the technicalities that require bureaucrats and technocrats behind the scenes. But those bureaucrats and those technocrats must do the work with communities. For instance, a big part of what we are doing, we won the case in the Constitutional Court. Right now, we see a whole lot of other organizations, NGOs with deep pockets, running around and doing what is called an extension of this. And it's okay, it's fine. We're in a democratic environment. Everybody must do what they want to do and what they can do. However, what is necessary and what is important is the education process. South African citizens need to be made to understand why this is necessary. Even though the Constitutional Court order is already out and it's binding on Parliament, it's binding on Home Affairs, the Speaker's office, because those are the entities. Home Affairs, because Home Affairs is the overarching, shall I call it, body or government department that the IEC falls under. Because the IEC is an agency, it's not a government department, so it has to be housed somewhere. And Home Affairs, for the simple reason that they deal with identification, deaths, and births. So they can verify once you've registered whether you're legitimate, you're a South African citizen, your IDs. But nonetheless, there's so much work that needs to go into the education process, more so than pre-94. Because pre-94, there was no education process. What the IEC called education, by the way, was going on TV, radio, newspapers, magazines, everywhere, running PR exercises, telling people, this is how you vote. You put an X next to the party of your choice. How is that democratic education? Nothing about accountability, nothing about what happens after you've voted, nothing about what happens in the 5 years, nothing about what happens should somebody pass on this and that, nothing about what happens when the political party does things. You voted for the party then takes decisions in those 5 years on your behalf without consulting you, without a referendum. The undemocratic, so-called, cruel apartheid government held referenda. We've never held a single referendum in South Africa. A single referendum to take decisions even on COVID. Something that changes your life entirely. We have not had the governing parties say, you know what, we were not voted to decide on this. COVID is a brand new situation. We don't understand what's going on. Let's get the citizens to tell us what they want. Do they want mandatory vaccination? Do they even want to vaccinate? So our powers and our freedoms as human beings have been completely usurped by profit. And profit governed by governments. Because like I said earlier, lawmaking in South Africa is fashioned exactly along the lawmaking process of Britain, of America. And what happens in Britain and America is exactly what happens here. When a law needs to be passed, companies send lobbyists to parliament, to MPs, to chairpersons of committees, to ministers, to presidents, to go and lobby and persuade them. They don't come back to you who voted. You hear about a new law. You're like, how can there be a new law when I don't know anything about it? And then they say to you, no, we did public participation. What are you talking about? You did public? Which public? I certainly didn't participate. And then they say to you, no. We had meetings in the legislature where we invited people. You're like, when? No, in the legislature we have a public participation unit. Oh, really? Which public? And then they'll call a whole lot of members of the ANC who come from some branch of the ANC that were fetched in 2 combis to come and represent 16 million residents of Gauteng. And they call that public participation.
Mandisa, I think I'm going to close it here. You and I still need to have a lot of conversations. There's a lot we still need to unpack. I had one more question for you, but I'm scared of asking it because I think, not even going over time, I think that probably needs to be the question we address the next time we're on a platform together of, do Black South Africans, do the majority of South Africans, Black or otherwise, actually really want democracy, or do they want something else? Because it seems like we're forcing people to do something that is not naturally what they want. But that's not for today. I just want to say thank you very much, and I look forward to engaging again. I don't know if you have any parting words.
No, thanks for inviting me again. I don't know if I should be saying this, but I'm launching my own podcast very soon.
Oh, snap. Good luck.
But you and I are still going to do these conversations. But the only difference will be I'll also get to ask you questions.
Oh, snap. Looking forward to it.
Girl questions, though.
Girl questions?
Yeah, girly questions.
Oh, wow. Thank you very much, Mandisa.
Yeah, because lots of girls ask me for your number, and obviously I can't give them
Let's shut this thing down. That's enough now. Bye. Please leave. Thank you.